What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Welcome everybody to my review series for the Harry Potter series. Up to this point, the only Wizarding World films I'd covered on the channel were for the 3 Fantastic Beasts films, with the first 2 Fantastic Beasts being, I believe, within the first 10 reviews I ever uploaded to this channel. I started this channel about a week and a half before the second Fantastic Beast came out, so I covered those first 2 back then, and then pretty recently did Fantastic Beasts 3, and here we are finally talking about the Harry Potter series. This is something I've wanted to cover on the channel for quite some time. And before we get into this, I do want to mention that this is a series I grew up with. I have tons of fond memories of in terms of the marketing for this movie and the movies around it, the theme park expansions, and it's just crazy to think about how far this franchise has come. Even though the new prequel films haven't been nearly as beloved, this series, whether it's the books, the movies, video games, toys, just anything, the theme park expansions, whatever it is, it's just gone on to become one of the most beloved series of all time, being up there and rivaling things like Star Wars, Star Trek, Lord of the Rings, and all these other big fantasy franchises. And for some, this is their favorite. For me, not so much, but I do love this series and I have a big attachment to it. I do want to make it abundantly clear, though, that I am a movie fan and I've played video games and, I've gone to the theme parks and all that stuff, but I've never ever read any of the books. Growing up as a kid, I wasn't really huge on books unless it was something like Star Wars related, if I'm completely honest. So I never got around to reading the book. So I'm not going to be going into this comparing the movie to the book. I'm not going to be going into this as a book fan. This will solely be my thoughts as a movie fan and just a fan of the series overall. I'm very happy to be joined in this series by my buddy Rashad G from Rashad G Reviews. And this is going to be the first time ever that he's seen these movies. So I will say this. He is a much older guy, didn't grow up with these movies. We have a bit of an age gap between the two of us. So I recognize that these movies may not be his cup of tea right out of the gate. I did warn him that the first 2 films definitely feel a lot more kiddie and are definitely something that feels more like a children's book than any of the other movies in the series. So he went in with that expectation, but there may be some polarizing thoughts moving ahead, which will make these videos a lot of fun. So a big thanks to Rashad for joining me on these. I know he wasn't necessarily thrilled initially, but I know his interest has been piqued simply because he's curious to see where this will go. So let's get into my thoughts on the very first Harry Potter film. The Sorcerer's Stone is directed by Chris Columbus, who's given us films like Home Alone 2, Mrs. Doubtfire, Bicentennial Man, and so many others. And of course, the writing credits firstly have to go to J.K. Rowling for giving us the novels that these are based on, with Steve Kloves giving us the screenplay of this movie. And where do you even start and end when it comes to the cast when you have such phenomenal people in this film that would go on to become stars from these films? People like Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, Emma Watson, Tom Felton, and of course veteran actors like Robbie Coltrane, Richard Harris, Maggie Smith, Ian Hart, Alan Rickman, John Hurt, and the list goes on and on. And the basic premise of this movie, or what we start off with, is we're seeing Harry Potter being dropped off at his Muggle family's homes. In this universe, Muggles are people who don't have magic powers, and essentially we learn that through his past, they're essentially going to put him into hiding, almost very much like a Luke Skywalker kind of situation, because of some dangerous thing that happens in the past that we learn more about over the course of the film, which of course is Voldemort. They end up going and hiding him away with his family, very Luke Skywalker style. Except his family is a bunch of assholes who know that he has some sort of magic within him and know that he comes from magic, so they kind of, treat him like crap. They have him living in this little closet under the staircase, and he's just treated like complete and utter garbage. He's got a really selfish cousin that he lives with that just treats him like trash as well. And ultimately, he's not treated like a human being. He's not given any love. And when we meet poor Harry Potter, he's just a kid that's just living with these asshole people who literally could not care less about him. One day, something weird starts to happen, and he starts to get all these letters from all these owls that just start bombarding their house with letters. And later on, we're introduced to the character of Hagrid, a big lovable oaf who tells him that he is a wizard and ends up taking him on an adventure, taking him to his first ever year at Hogwarts, the greatest school for magic and wizardry in the world. And over the course of the film, Harry Potter will start to learn why his name is so popular, learn about his parents, learn about this world, the lore, how to be a wizard, and learn about the big threat that is Voldemort. And over the course of the film, like all of these do, there's a separate adventure, this time around centering around the Sorcerer's Stone, and we do get that tease and that reveal on Voldemort at the end of the film, which of course, if you've seen this series, you know that he becomes a big part of the story later on. And yeah, right out of the gate, if you haven't already been able to tell, I love this movie. I think it's a great time, and rewatching it, what I think is so impressive about this film is that it really does a great job of setting up the groundwork for everything to come. It really does a great job of setting up the narrative, the lore, the mythology, and everything around this world. And, you know, despite any thoughts that people have on J.K. Rowling these days in terms of her political stances on things and some of the very, inconsiderate comments that she's made on social media, the lady's a genius. There's no way of getting around it. She came up with this series all on her own in these books, and she created a world and a mythology that stands the test of time and is up there in terms of lore in the same way that people look at Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and those various fantasy franchises. So you have to praise her where praise is due. And when it comes to especially the Harry Potter movies, the story that she wrote around these novels and these movies and worked with the filmmakers to come up with is phenomenal. I really thoroughly enjoyed this film. Now, of course, like I mentioned before, this is a bit of a more kiddie adventure. The first story and the second story have our actors really young, and I think one of the benefits of this series is seeing our actors age year to year in between all of these stories. So to see them age even alongside myself as I was getting older was pretty amazing, and gives this franchise something different that a lot of franchises like a Star Wars, like a Lord of the Rings, like a Star Trek haven't really been able to do. We have one continuity of movies that follows the same characters from when they were kids as to when they were older, and of course those older actors who are in these films also age as well. So it just feels like you really grow with all these characters, and not only do they age up throughout the stories, the narratives become more mature, more grounded, more gritty, and the silly adventures that we're having in this film or even in the second film are nowhere to be found when you're 4, 5, 6 installments further into the franchise. It is crazy to rewatch this movie, see the groundwork that's being set up, and recognize how dark and different and serious this movie will become later on. These stories will become. The performances from actors like Daniel Radcliffe and Emma Watson, Rupert Grint, Tom Felton, I mean, these kids become some of the best actors working in Hollywood today, especially around that time. They give such great performances in this film, even though it is a little bit more kiddie. You can tell that they're child actors here, but it is pretty amazing to see the kind of performances that they'll give later on and how much more they'll grow into these roles. Now, I have an abundance more to say if you can't already tell. I want to talk about specifics, and we haven't even touched on John Williams' beautiful score for this that completely has defined a generation in terms of music and just a feel and a vibe. And since he wrote this somewhere close to the prequel films of Star Wars, I've always felt that this film in particular has similarities to a lot of the music he wrote for things like The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith. So I always love hearing the score in this. But yeah, I obviously want to keep rambling, but I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to my guest. A big thanks to Rashad for joining me, and I'll be back once we hear his thoughts on this.
I've been challenged to watch all of the Harry Potter movies because I've never seen them, and if you know our Tit for Tat series, me and Perez, we pick movies out for each other that we normally would not watch. So I've never seen the Harry Potter movies. I've never been a fan of the franchise. I cared not to watch them, but I'm trying to broaden my horizons these days. And I think you did inform me that I think I have to survive the first one, because the first one's more like real kiddie, and then the rest of them it gets better. Somebody even had the nerve to say that this franchise is better than Star Wars. I even put him out there, Pert-minded, I don't care. He said that this franchise buries Star Wars. I said, bury Star Wars? I gotta see this for myself. I know, Perez, I know you're gonna disagree with that. Y'all, look here. Whatever you feel about Star Wars, one thing you can admit, when you watch New Hope, the very first movie, it grips you from the beginning. When you first see that Star Destroyer go by, and that opening battle, and the intro of Darth Vader, it pulls you. I don't care what you say, that opening scene will pull you. Nothing about this movie pulled me. From the beginning, I did not get pulled in. I did not care about the characters. I don't care about the protagonist. Okay, Harry Potter himself. I don't care about this kid. I don't. This is one of those movies where I can't call this a bad movie because I know it has a fan base. I know people who love and adore this franchise. But I'm just going to say it's not for me. It's not my cup of tea. It took me a while to get through this. It took me about maybe 5 hours, 6 hours to watch this movie because I kept nodding off. I could not keep my eyes open. It didn't grip me. It didn't pull me. I'm forcing myself to watch this. I am trying to find something that I can somewhat, so that I can grab onto. I cannot latch onto that titty. I tried. Okay, it had a 3-headed dog. I said, okay, maybe I can get down with a 3-headed dog. Okay. I'm trying to find a character I can somewhat, okay, that Grizzly Adams looking motherfucker with the big beard. I forgot his name. No. I couldn't follow the characters. I couldn't follow the story. He gets dropped off to this family who abuses him up until he's 11 years old. They keep him in this little attic. He comes out, discovers that he's a wizard, goes to Hogwarts or whatever it's called, Hogwash, meets a couple of friends, and then they all just spend the rest of the movie doing magic and discovering their magical powers. You know, Harry Potter. I couldn't get it. No diss to UK people. I love you. I love y'all, man. Mike, shout out, homie. Yo, I couldn't get into this joint, man. This was way too kiddie. This is like, well, even like, I couldn't even show my son this joint. My son, I think, would get bored out of this. Because I'm so used to showing him like MCU stuff, and so he's used to kid movies, but kid movies that kick ass. There's nothing kick ass about this movie. It's just a bunch of wands and spells and, you know, discovering the secrets of the spell of the book and the stone. And, you know, okay, there's one part that I thought was actually kind of cool. It was like this rugby type game. It's like rugby or soccer where they're on the broomsticks and I'm like, okay, this is a Universal ride. And I know Universal has a whole section of their park dedicated to Harry Potter. So even though I didn't care for the movie, but I want to go on these rides because there were a couple of cool sequences like that one where I'm like, okay, I can see this being a ride. But as a story, as a narrative, as a movie, as a film, I wasn't feeling it. This is going to be a long fucking journey. But I'm up for the challenge. But Harry Potter the Sorcerer's Stone, not for me. But then again, this is coming from a guy who loves movies like Howard the Duck and Purple Rain and Crush Groove, movies that Perez don't too much care about. Our tastes are totally different, man, but it's all good. Makes for some dope-ass dialogue. So anyways, y'all, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, to me, it gets a D. It bored me. There was nothing about it that I found interesting except for a couple of chase sequences and even the CG, but I have to give it a pass because this is 2001 CGI. This came out the same year as The Mummy Returns. I'll give it a pass for the CG being kind of shitty, but other than that, nothing to this movie. So Perez, that's all I got. This movie didn't do it for me, but I can't call it trash. But it's just not my cup of tequila. That's it, and that's all.
Well, everybody, I think you've seen the last time that Rashad and I will ever be friends. And, you know, I'm glad that you guys were here to witness this. Rashad, damn, dude! I can't believe you didn't enjoy this film at all, pretty much, it seems like. Yeah, this is going to be a fun adventure because I'm looking forward to this franchise being something that I can win over Rashad with each installment. So please stick around. If you guys are not already on board, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button and stick around because as we start to drop these reviews for the Harry Potter movies, let's hope and pray. If you're a Harry Potter fan like myself, let's hope and pray that we can get Rashad to love this series by the time we get to the end. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that I can turn this man into a Harry Potter fan by the time we get to the end so he can hopefully look back at this film and have a far more fond approach to it. But as usual, a big thanks to Rashad for joining me. Always love hearing your thoughts, and I love the difference of opinions. If anything, even if you hate this series moving forward, it should make for pretty interesting and fun and funny videos. Some of you are probably sitting at home thinking, I want to kill that Rashad guy right now. Or maybe you think I'm just talking nonsense and you think that Rashad is right and these movies are you know, not really good. Whatever the case may be, please leave a comment down below. I want to hear what you guys have to say about this series. But I do have more to talk about on this series, so let's get into it. As I mentioned earlier, and I just want to highlight one more time before we move forward, is Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, Rupert Grint, Tom Felton, and the rest of the young kid cast here that would take me forever to list off. They are so good in this movie, and there's such an innocence to the approach to their performances, yet these really grounded performances at times. There are moments where it definitely feels like child actors who didn't really know what was going on, and they were trying to deliver these lines, and you could tell that right after they delivered the lines that the same amount of emotion wasn't there because they were just delivering the lines. They weren't really keeping up the performances at certain moments. But outside of little moments like that, I think these kids give really good performances. They create characters that are individual to who they are. They really do feel like really tangible characters. They're silly, they're cute, they're fun. They have their quips over the course of the film. Of course, there's a big layer of cheese on this because this one definitely is the most kiddie out of all of them, with the second one kind of following suit to an extent, but starting to lean a little bit more into that darkness. But yeah, I find that these actors did such a great job as kids, and again, it's just phenomenal to see how much they'll grow in these roles as time goes on. In this film alone, though, I think that the innocence that all these actors have, and to even see some of the side characters in this movie that will go on to be bigger characters in terms of the kids in these films later on, it's pretty amazing just to see how some little dorky kid in this movie will go on to become one of the coolest kids later on 6 movies down the road. Robbie Coltrane, who plays Hagrid, is fantastic in this film, and of course everybody loves him. He's a big lovable oaf, and I feel like he plays the character of Hagrid perfectly. And moving forward in the franchise, he's only better and better. And what I really didn't remember before rewatching this film was how much crucial dialogue Robbie Coltrane is actually given when it comes to setting up the lore and the world. He really is the one who is giving all the exposition to Harry, especially when it comes to things like Voldemort. Of course, Hagrid has that silly side to him where he doesn't want to give up secrets, but he's consistently giving up secrets, and that's kind of what drives our characters to do and learn different things. He is very much the exposition character, but they do it in such a charming and lovable way, and the way that they explain and set up the whole Voldemort story in this film, those lines of dialogue that Robbie Coltrane has to deliver, I feel like really set the tone for everything to come. And I think that had somebody lesser, perform those lines, and maybe it wouldn't have felt as epic, but all these years later, you can go back to a movie like this, and the setup for Voldemort coming from Robbie Coltrane is really strong. And yeah, I gotta praise Robbie Coltrane for his role in these films, but in this film alone. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Richard Harris in this film, who plays Dumbledore, and I think he did a great job of setting up who this character is in this film. Of course, we know that Richard Harris will end up passing away before these films end up ending, so they do recast Dumbledore, but I think that the recast is great later on, and we're going to get into that with those films. But as far as this film, I think that Richard Harris does such a great job of playing this almost Father Time kind of wizard. I think he plays into it really well, and it feels like a wizard of olden times. And yeah, he was just the perfect casting for this role at the time. Of course, the Dumbledore they bring in later on, I think, is fantastic as well. I think he really defined the role for himself later on, to be completely honest. And sometimes you forget about Richard Harris. But what Richard Harris sets up for Dumbledore in this film, I think, is really strong, and I really enjoyed his performance. Maggie Smith as Mcgonagall in this film is great, and I just wanted to highlight real quick, I love Maggie Smith. Anytime I see her in anything, Downton Abbey, Harry Potter, whatever the case may be, she's such a lovable, funny, charming woman, and I kind of wish sometimes that I was related to her. Ian Hart, who plays Professor Quirrell in this film, who we later find out is the villain of this movie, or at least part of the villain, as he's attached to Voldemort in a way. Yeah, I think he plays the character so well in this film. There's a subtlety to little moments with his character that you wouldn't pick up on first viewing if you didn't know he was already the villain. But, after having seen this movie a million times, this time around I was a lot more analyzing his moments and his movements and recognizing how much he was really there all the time, and how there's so much foreshadowing to him being the villain, but you don't think about it because they actually try to focus on the fact that the villain of the story in a lot of ways is Snape, played by Alan Rickman, of course, the late great Alan Rickman, one of my favorite actors of all time, who has given us phenomenal performances, with one of my favorite ones being from Sweeney Todd. I just love him in that film, but I love him in this series. He plays Snape so well, and I'm so glad he was able to finish out these films before he ended up passing away. I think it's sad that he passed away at all. I wish we were still getting movies with Alan Rickman, but I really enjoy his performance in this film. And what I think is really cool is I saw a behind the scenes thing where apparently Alan Rickman was actually given information by J.K. Rowling for where his character would end up going later down the line. I'm not going to mention that here, even though I've been talking about spoilers of this movie. I'm not going to mention that here because I know that Rashad is watching this and I don't want to spoil anything for him. But yeah, J.K. Rowling gave him some more added detail that even the director of this film didn't have, which he did bring to the character in this film. So you can see that in some of the subtleties of his performance. And yeah, I am looking forward to rewatching more of these films and getting more Snape, because Alan Rickman is so good in the role. And then, as I mentioned, John Williams, fantastic score, completely just making this film what it is. There are moments of this film that would not work on the same level that they do if it wasn't for John Williams' score. He brings such an energy and excitement and mysticism to this franchise that is just completely and utterly unmatched. And you know, even though later in the franchise John Williams would end up leaving, he does not compose all of them. What he set up here that would end up being reprised and played off of in future films, similar to what's happening with Star Wars right now, I think is pretty phenomenal. Once again, he completely started another iconic series, Jurassic Park, you know, Star Wars, this, where he started it off, you know, did a few installments, and then ended up obviously passing the torches off to various other composers for different projects in that series. And yeah, he just has such a magic with setting up these series, and the music that he composes for this film alone is phenomenal. There were moments where I found myself getting distracted by how beautiful the music was, and I was listening to the music more than I was watching the movie. But you know, it just kind of adds to these moments so well. And I love John Williams. He's fucking amazing. Honestly, I think the biggest negatives, the only real negatives I have about this movie at this point, really rewatching these movies, is that there is definitely an element of the digital effects not being great. And it's funny because I believe this came out around the same time that the first Lord of the Rings came out, which of course looks way better. But I believe the Lord of the Rings film, the first one, had, I believe, about double the time to make the movie than this movie had. So it just goes to show how production time and of course money obviously changes things up, because there's CGI in that film that looks far better than some of the CGI in this film, which is something that dates this film. There are moments where, you know, the characters look really cartoony or the monsters look really cartoony. But on the flip side, the amount of practical effects and actual built sets and sound stages that they filmed this movie on is pretty amazing. Honestly, there are so many great moments over the course of this film where you're just looking at these beautiful sets and locations. So much of Hogwarts was practical. So much of these places they went to were practical. And even though some of the digital effects don't hold up, the costume design, the set design, again, the practical effects, the different kind of props that they were given. There's so much about this film that feels so real and tangible that even with some of the very cartoony digital effects for this film that would obviously get better in later installments, I just find myself completely engulfed in the narrative and the world because of how fully realized this world truly was. I'm looking now and I've been filming unedited right now for about 20 minutes, and I don't know how long this video will turn out to be, but I want to say a big thanks to you guys for watching. Didn't plan to go on for this long, but if you can't tell already, I love this series. I love these movies. A big thanks to Rashad for joining me for this first installment, and I look forward to having him on very soon for The Chamber of Secrets, the sequel to this film, once again directed by Chris Columbus, and is the last film that he would end up directing. But yeah, big thanks to you guys for watching. Can't wait to hear what you guys have to say. Do you agree with me? Do you think this is a masterpiece, a fantastic film that launches one of the most iconic series? Or do you agree with Rashad and this isn't really your cup of tea? Can't wait to hear what you guys have to say. Hit that like button, comment your thoughts, subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.